Welcome to the fourth week of the war in Iran, and while in our last update we said that we might be here for a long time, President Trump quickly contradicted that by posting on Truth Social that he is considering ending the war in the Middle East because they are reportedly close to achieving their military objectives. This statement came out just a few hours after he told reporters outside the White House that he didn't want a ceasefire because, and let's quote him here, they are literally destroying the other side. Although this kind of contradictory statement is expected from President Trump because of his well-known history of saying things that don't match, we now have reason to believe for the first time since the war began that Washington is seriously considering a possible off-ramp. On March 20, Axios reported that the Trump administration believed they only needed a month to weaken the Iranians through more airstrikes, seize Harg Island, and use it as a bargaining chip in upcoming negotiations. The next day, Axios reported that Washington had already started internal discussions, preliminary talks on what peace negotiations with Iran might look like. According to an American official who spoke to the outlet, Washington wants Iran to make 6 commitments. No missile program for 5 years, 0 uranium enrichment, shutting down nuclear facilities last year, and strict external monitoring of the production and use of centrifuges and related machines that could support nuclear weapons development. Washington also wants an arms control agreement with neighboring countries that would set a limit on Iran's missile stockpile to only 1,000, and no financial support for any of Iran's proxies. Although this list of demands is ambitious, it remains to be seen whether Iran will accept it, especially since the word dominating this weekend is escalation. And it seems the Iranians are doing this quite well. But before we begin, if you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this. Strikes on Diego Garcia between Thursday night and Friday morning. Iran launched 2 intermediate-range ballistic missiles at Diego Garcia, a joint US-UK military base located on a remote atoll in the Indian Ocean, approximately 4,000 kilometers from Iranian territory. The Wall Street Journal first reported the attempted attack, and a UK official also confirmed to CNBC that the attack was unsuccessful. According to CNN, one of the missiles failed in mid-flight, while another was intercepted by a U.S. warship. However, an Iranian official denied that Iran was behind the launch of the ballistic missiles. Despite the denial, it's hard to ignore the significance of the attempt. The base in Diego Garcia, which has around 2,500 personnel, mostly Americans, was intentionally built in a location expected to be beyond the reach of most adversaries. For many years, Iran has maintained that the range of their ballistic missiles is limited to only 2,000 kilometers. And on March 8, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi himself said that Iran intentionally limited the missile range to 2,000 kilometers so that they would not be seen as a threat outside the region. This limitation was imposed by former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, according to reports, despite opposition from the IRGC, because he wanted to show Europe that Iran was not targeting them. Jeffrey Lewis, a well-known expert on global security at Embry College, told CNN that the IRGC has long been waiting for Khamenei to either change his mind or pass away so that the 2,000-kilometer limitation could be disregarded. And now that he has been killed in the first attack of the war, the IRGC has a free hand to continue the missile program. How Iran was able to launch a missile with a range of approximately 4,000 kilometers, double the declared range, remains a mystery. According to former IDF Air Defense Chief Ron Kapp in the Jerusalem Post, it is likely that Iran adapted their long-developed satellite technology into a long-range ballistic missile. This means they used the same multi-stage rocket design intended to put satellites into orbit, but directed it on a ballistic trajectory. Justin Bronk, senior research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, suggested a similar explanation, identifying Iran's Samor space launch vehicle as a possible base, although he mentioned that such an improvised adaptation could result in a lack of accuracy. Others, like Deka Eveleth, A research analyst at CNA Corporation have suggested that Iran may have used a Khorramshahr missile with a lighter payload. A lighter payload would allow the missile to travel farther, but at the cost of reduced destructive power. Although all of these are possible explanations, the truth is that no one really knows how Iran managed to do this. Most likely, unless there's a miracle in journalism, we probably won't know the full story for a long time. The removal of the previous missile range limitation is changing the threat landscape for countries beyond the Middle East. Trita Parsi, co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, told CNN that this attempt suggests that U.S. bases previously thought to be beyond Iran's reach may now be within range, as well as American warships stationed 3,000 kilometers away that were assumed to be safe. For countries like Romania that allow the U.S. to use their air bases for refueling, surveillance, and satellite communication, that decision has become more dangerous. Parsi also raised the question of how Iran was able to target the base, noting that Iran lacks satellite coverage over much of the Indian Ocean. According to him, the intelligence likely comes from Russia and China. According to Parsi, this is an aspect of the war that surprised the Trump administration. The attempt at Diego Garcia is part of a broader pattern of intelligence gaps that have emerged throughout the war. Before Operation Epic Fury began on February 28, most international estimates of Iran's ballistic missile stockpile, up to 2,500 missiles. The IDF entered the war with an estimate that Iran possessed approximately 2,500 ballistic missiles, and ACT estimated almost the same number. But on the 10th day, the Jerusalem Post reported that approximately 2,410 ballistic missiles had already been launched, and Iran was still continuing to launch more. This does not include the missiles that were destroyed in American strikes and Israeli strikes on their storage facilities. There are three possible explanations for this. Even the most aggressive estimates greatly underestimate Iran's production and stockpile. Despite Israel's extensive intelligence efforts, the Iranian government has successfully hidden a large part of its arsenal. Or as stated by the IRGC, missile production continues even during wartime. Although the latest statement should be met with skepticism due to the extensive damage caused by the combined forces to Iran's military infrastructure, the fact that they continue to launch missiles and attempt ambitious strikes like the one on Diego Garcia shows that this is possible. Looking at it more broadly, it seems that U.S. and Israeli intelligence underestimated the number of missiles Iran possesses, their range, and did not anticipate the extent of intelligence support from Russia and possibly China, which expands Iran's capability to target areas far from their borders. This is not a minor oversight. We should also mention that Iran denied launching the missiles. Despite Iran being outspoken throughout the war, most would expect them to claim the attack even if the missiles were intercepted. However, according to Dr. Anna Tabridzi, a fellow at the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House, this is not always the case. She told Al-Azhar that Iran's denials usually surface when an attack crosses new red lines or hits targets that could trigger a broader response. In this context, the denial is not meant to reject responsibility, but to limit the impact of the capability they have demonstrated. Against this backdrop, President Trump posted on Truth Social on Saturday night that if Iran does not fully open the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, the U.S. will strike their various power plants, starting with the largest one. This ultimatum came out almost 24 hours after he suggested the possibility of ending the war. As reported by Axios, this reversal shows that the Hormuz crisis has become an issue he cannot walk away from. While seemingly looking for an exit, the price of gasoline in the U.S. reached $3.94 per gallon over the weekend, according to ALA, more than $1 increase from a month ago, and Brent crude has risen by almost 50% since the war began. Again, we return to what seems to be the defining issue of the war. It's not only the U.S. and Israel who have the ability to escalate. After Trump's threat, The Speaker of Iran's parliament posted on X that if Iran's power plants and other infrastructure are targeted, the vital infrastructure, energy, and oil facilities throughout the region will become legitimate targets and will be completely destroyed. According to him, this means that oil prices will remain high for a long time. The spokesman of the Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters also confirmed the threat, saying that if the U.S. targets fuel or energy infrastructure in Iran, Iran will retaliate against the energy, information technology, and desalination infrastructure of the U.S. and its allies throughout the Middle East. Meanwhile, the IRGC warned that they will completely close the strait and will not reopen it until any damaged power plants are rebuilt. The semi-official Tasnim news agency also released a list of major U.S. tech companies with operations in Israel and the Gulf, which are their targets. This includes the offices of Google, Microsoft, Palantir, IBM, NVIDIA, and Oracle. But while Iran's threats remain focused on Israel and America, the countries truly at risk if the escalation continues are those currently receiving the most intense attacks. The UAE had to face more projectiles than any other country in the war. And according to the Jerusalem Post, as many as 1,468 missiles hit the Emirates on the 10th day. Bahrain, which is home to the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, and was hit on the first day of the war, is small enough that even a limited campaign against its infrastructure could cause severe damage. Kuwait's Mina Al-Madi refinery, one of the largest in the Middle East, has already been hit several times by Iranian drones. Targeting desalination plants is a red line because these, more than oil, are the main source of water in the Middle East. As we discussed in our previous video on another channel, if desalination plants are targeted, it could cause a devastating humanitarian crisis. Bahrain is particularly vulnerable. A desalination plant there was hit by an Iranian drone. This is an island nation with no natural aquifers and relies on desalination for about 90% of its drinking water. According to Danny Citrinowicz, a fellow at the Atlantic Council, even if Carr Island, the most important node in the country's oil economy, is blocked, it won't force Iran to open the strait. This is despite the fact that about 90% of Iran's crude exports pass through its terminals. He said on X, and I quote, "This shows the continued misunderstanding of Iran's strategic doctrine. For others, control of the strait is not just economic leverage. It is a fundamental part of the regime's survival and deterrence. Under pressure, Iran is more likely to escalate than to concede." At the time of recording, the 48-hour deadline has not yet passed. But if it does and Trump follows through on his word, the war will enter its most dangerous phase. If Trump fails to carry out his threat, Iran may declare a strategic victory, making it harder for Washington and Jerusalem to claim that they are winning. But it wasn't all escalation this weekend. The Jerusalem Post reported that Iran decided to limit its attacks on Saudi Arabia out of concern that continued attacks might trigger a direct military response from the Saudis. According to sources, Iranian officials believe that the Saudis are on alert and that continued large-scale attacks might force Riyadh to take action, something they have so far avoided by not directly attacking Iran. Saudi officials clarified, including in their talks with Iran, that their red line is any attack on power plants and desalination facilities. If Saudi decides to attack Iran, this raises the question of what will happen next. Will Pakistan follow, especially since the two countries signed a defense pact in 2025? In addition to reducing attacks on Saudi Arabia, Iran decided to avoid targeting Qatar after the strike on the Ras Laffan plant, which destroyed about 3.5% of the global supply and was considered a very high escalation. However, attacks against Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE will continue as usual, according to the Jerusalem Post. Outside of Iran, as we mentioned earlier, Russia is providing intelligence to Iran to support its strike campaign. According to the Wall Street Journal, Russia is providing the exact locations of American military forces, as well as their regional allies. The Kremlin denied this, but the evidence continues to mount. And this week, we received the clearest confirmation yet that Moscow sees its role in the war as a bargaining chip. Politico reported on March 20th that the Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev proposed a quid pro quo to Steve Wynkoff and Jared Kushner at a meeting in Miami on March 11th. The offer was simple. Moscow would stop providing intelligence to Iran. In return, Washington would stop providing intelligence to Ukraine, but the U.S. rejected the proposal. Dmitriev called the report about the proposal fake news in a post on X. However, it seems that President Trump confirmed the existence of such an arrangement when he said on Fox News, "I think he might be helping them a little bit." Yeah, I guess. And he probably thinks we're helping Ukraine, right? The fact that Russia is helping Iran is not surprising to most regional observers because they have been allies for a long time. However, the ability of a Russian envoy to propose such a deal has caused concern among European diplomats. They are worried that Moscow is trying to divide Europe and the U.S. at a critical moment for transatlantic relations. President Trump has long complained about what he considers cowards in NATO who refuse to send ships to the strait. But European leaders have shown little interest in participating in this war. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said directly that this is not our war. We did not start it. No NATO ally was consulted before Operation Epic Fury began. And EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas told Reuters that European countries really do not understand Washington's recent moves. According to Jim Townsend, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense on CNN, many countries were hurt by the way Trump and his administration treated them. And then his administration would just come back to ask for help when it needed it. It is also true that Europe is worried about putting their sailors and ships at risk. All of this is just so Trump can say that he is not putting American lives at risk. And this is not the only proposal from the Kremlin regarding Iran. Axios reported that Moscow once proposed transferring Iran's uranium to Russia, but Washington also rejected this. Despite the current misunderstandings between Washington and its traditional war allies, America's rejection of Russia's offers is encouraging because it shows that despite Trump's public frustrations with European allies, the administration is not yet ready to give Moscow a win in Ukraine in exchange for cooperation on Iran. And regarding Ukraine, Kiev plays a major role in training America's allies in the Middle East, despite Trump's statement to NBC News that the last person they need help from is Zelensky. This should also be pointed out. Despite Trump's constant belittling and undermining of Zelensky, the latter has shown dedication and is actually helping American allies in the Gulf to defend themselves. Meanwhile, according to Middle East Eye, Washington is rejecting the requests of Gulf allies to increase their interceptor stockpiles, while pressure is mounting on Gulf states to join the war as a condition for resupply. Without interceptors, these countries have almost no defense against Iranian ballistic missiles. On the other hand, Ukraine has safeguarded the officials it badly needs to help keep the Gulf safe. According to a senior Ukrainian Air Force officer quoted by The Times, around 200 Ukrainian personnel have been deployed to Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia to help the Gulf states defend themselves against the same Shahed-type drones. What the Ukrainians saw upon their arrival was alarming, according to their own report. The officer told The Times that he was surprised to hear that Gulf air defense crews were firing up to 8 Patriot interceptor missiles at a single target, each one costing over $3 million. In some cases, they even use SM-6 missiles, which cost around $6 million per shot to bring down a Shahed, which only costs about $70,000. On the other hand, Ukrainian crews said that they usually use only 1 or 2 missiles to shoot down a Russian ballistic missile and rely on a combination of vintage aircraft, interceptor drones, and electronic warfare to bring down drones. The Times reported that data from Ukrainian Patriot crew missions has been shared with allies who also use the system. However, it seems that the U.S. and their Gulf allies ignored Ukraine's complex calculations to improve intercept rates. According to the officer, I don't understand what they're doing or what they've been observing during the 4 years we've been fighting. Analysts suggested that the shortage was due to the way operations were conducted. According to the report, Gulf crews left their batteries in automatic mode while hiding, whereas Ukrainian operators stayed at the controls and fired manually. This difference is important when you're trying to distinguish a $70,000 drone from a person in an aircraft, and when you want your interceptors to last as long as possible. Ukrainian officials also criticized how American allies in the Gulf store their air defense systems, which allowed cheap drones to cause more than $1 billion in damage. If American allies can implement the lessons from Ukraine, it could significantly reduce the cost of defending against Iranian drone swarms and reserve their most expensive interceptors for ballistic missiles that truly require them. And finally, let's move to Lebanon, where this weekend Israeli Defense Minister Yisrael Katz ordered the military to destroy all crossings over the Litani River and houses near the border of the two countries. Although Israel explained this as a measure to prevent Hezbollah from moving their fighters and weapons to the south, Lebanon's President Joseph Al called this step the initial stage of a possible ground invasion. IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, stated that the operation against Hezbollah is just beginning and will be prolonged. The Israeli military has already destroyed 3 bridges in southern Lebanon in the past 10 days, but on Sunday, the order was expanded to include all remaining crossings. Israeli warplanes hit the Qasimir Bridge, an important highway link connecting the villages of Tyre district to the north, with multiple strikes that left deep craters on the bridge. According to Ramzi Kais, a researcher in Lebanon for Human Rights Watch, if all the bridges over the Litani are destroyed and the south is isolated, civilians could suffer greatly, possibly losing access to food, medicine, and basic necessities. While all this was happening, Hezbollah intensified their attacks on Israel, killing 1 person in the northern part of the country, the first such death from an attack originating from Lebanon. According to them, the attack targeted a gathering of enemy Israeli soldiers in the northern community of Moskavan. Although only 1 person was killed in the attack, thousands of others have died throughout the region, and the number is expected to rise as the war continues and intensifies. For now, we hope that an agreement can be established to prevent the Middle East from sinking further into chaos. Thank you for watching.